They laughed at him. They ordered him around. They called him a useless old man in front of the entire break room without even lowering their voices. No one knew that the man in the worn-out uniform, holding a mop in the Fremont warehouse, was actually Oliver Grant, the founder and CEO of the largest transportation company in the American Midwest. But he said nothing, didn't react, didn't let a single unusual glance show, because he wasn't here to stand out. He was here to disappear. He became Eli, a new janitor. His file reading, unemployed for 7 years, with a gaunt appearance, a slightly stooped back, and a slow gait like a man all too used to being overlooked. No one recognized him. No one questioned why someone like him would apply for the night shift, a place with low pay, no insurance, and that was often neglected. And that was exactly what he needed. The Fremont warehouse was not an ordinary branch. According to reports, it had the highest turnover rate, the largest number of internal complaints, and was where dozens of inventory reports went missing each year. But strangely, no one was fired for it. The only ones who got fired were those who asked questions. Oliver didn't come here to suspect. He came here to prove that the corruption of a system wasn't in the small mistakes, but in the silence, the complicity, and the powerful names that never appeared on camera. That name was Victor Hale, once Oliver's trusted aide, now in full control of the region's operational coordination. And from what Oliver knew, Victor had created a network of manipulation from the inside out, leaving no trace. But every glare, every scolding, every shipment without paperwork, these were the first pieces of the puzzle, and he began to quietly piece them together. On his first shift, no one greeted him. Brenda, the floor supervisor, tossed him a broom and turned her back. Mark, the team lead, looked him up and down, then turned back to his colleagues with a sneer, as if he'd just seen a joke. "Be careful, he might pass out mid-shift," one person joked. Oliver didn't react. He just lowered his head and started mopping the floor. He didn't need to get angry, because he wasn't here to survive. He was here to expose. And to do that, he had to let them believe he was nothing. Eli's, Oliver's alias, first day of work began with the smell of floor-cleaning chemicals and the relentless sound of an invoice printer at the end of the aisle. No one showed him where to get his uniform, no one explained how to scan warehouse codes, and no one told him he could take a break during his shift. Brenda, the floor supervisor, walked past as if he didn't exist. Mark, the one in charge of shipping, tossed him a crude map while muttering, "Don't get in the way of the forklift." No one cared who he was, and that very fact made it easy for him to see everything. Oliver, or Eli, just quietly pushed his mop cart, but his eyes missed nothing. An unlabeled crate was pulled into Area A, a section that was supposed to be thoroughly inspected. An employee named Corey signed for 2 departments he wasn't even in charge of. No one said anything. No one asked anything. And that was the most terrifying part. During his break, Oliver walked into the small break room, where the smell of instant noodles mixed with scornful laughter. Corey was telling a joke about the new old guy, him. Mark laughed along silently, his eyes glancing over Oliver as if he were part of the mop he was holding. Oliver didn't smile. He just nodded a greeting and sat down in a far corner. His hand rested lightly on his jacket pocket, where a tiny microphone was sewn into the inner seam. Every jeer, every mocking laugh was being recorded. Brenda came to the table, glanced at him, and said loudly enough for the whole room to hear, "You were supposed to be sweeping Area D, but you mopped all the way to Area F. Are you lost or just lazy?" Everyone burst out laughing. Oliver bowed his head slightly, replying in a voice so slow and sincere that almost no one noticed it was an act. "I'm sorry. I'm not yet familiar with the layout here." Brenda shook her head, gave a faint smile, and walked away. Inside, he wasn't angry. He only felt more certain. Because these behaviors weren't random. They weren't simply the harshness of an industrial environment. They were organized. They followed a pattern. There was a purpose behind them to push anyone who asked questions out of the system. And Eli was their perfect test subject. At the end of his shift, while collecting trash in the inventory area, Oliver overheard two young employees whispering, "Another package is missing. Just mark it as a data entry error. No one checks." He walked past, his head bowed as if he hadn't heard a thing, but in his mind he was already fitting the pieces into a larger map. This wasn't just a toxic environment. It was an ecosystem of silence, where wrongdoing didn't just exist. It was protected by those who knew exactly what was happening. In the following days, Eli continued to play the part of an invisible man. He arrived earlier than everyone, left later, and never refused any task, no matter how strenuous. And in that silence, he began to realize the musty smell in the Fremont warehouse didn't just come from damp walls or dirty floors. It was the smell of manipulation. One midweek evening, Oliver was sweeping the area behind the loading dock when a truck pulled up. No horn, no delivery slip, no one to sign for it. Another man in a worn-out uniform got out, tossed two large crates into the inventory area, and disappeared into the darkness. Brenda appeared a few minutes later, along with Mark. They didn't inspect, didn't log it, didn't scan any codes. Brenda just glanced at it and said quietly, "Move this batch to Area E. Mark the date as yesterday." Mark nodded without a word. Oliver, hidden behind a shelving unit, kept his hand steady on the broom handle, his eyes unblinking. A minute later, he bent down as if picking something up. But he was actually pressing the record button on the microphone hidden under his collar. That night, in his small rented room in the suburbs, Oliver turned on his computer and began to log every anomaly shipment arrived off schedule. No invoice, entry date falsified. He named the file Entry 01 Manual Override, Brenda. Then he closed his laptop and turned off the light. But in his mind, Brenda's voice still echoed, "Just follow Victor's instructions." Victor. The name had come up for the second time in 2 days. The time before, during a break, Brenda had also whispered as she hung up the phone, "Just like that. Victor said it's okay, but no one in this warehouse had ever met Victor. No picture, no meetings, no public emails. He was like a ghost, controlling everything from a distance, and the less present he was, the more dangerous he became. The next day, Oliver took on an extra shift because an employee had called in sick. Brenda handed him his assignment with a strange attitude and artificial friendliness. Just do it right. Don't ask questions. That very night, another unlabeled package appeared. Oliver asked gently, "Does this warehouse have any special inspection rules?" Brenda's expression changed instantly. "You don't need to know. Your job is to mop the floor, not to question things." Oliver nodded and looked down, but he clearly heard Mark sneer behind him. Typical new guy, hasn't been taught a lesson yet, and in his heart the conviction grew clearer. This wasn't an inefficiently run warehouse. This was a system operating with intent, designed to eliminate anything not under Victor's control. He began to mark the arrival times of the suspicious shipments, cross-referencing them with Mark and Brenda's shift schedules. A pattern began to emerge. Shipments arrived late on Tuesday and Friday nights. No one signed for them except Brenda. There was always an unusual presence of Mark in the shipping area, even when he wasn't on shift, and every time, Victor's name would come up in an incoming call brief, but followed by a distinct change in attitude. Oliver had no photos, no invoices, but he had the scent of collusion, the scent of sweaty palms, not from labor, but from the fear of being discovered. In the midst of a system of abuse packaged as discipline, and an environment thick with apathy, Oliver never expected the thing that would stun him would be a cup of coffee. It was sitting neatly on the sink, next to the utility closet he went to every night to clean his tools. No note, no sender's name, just a white paper cup, still hot, with the right amount of sugar he always used. Oliver stood still for a few seconds. The liquid inside was nothing special, but in that cold warehouse, a small act could melt the ice. He didn't have to guess for long. As he walked out to the packing area, he saw Sarah, the young woman in charge of inventory control, who was always on time, said little, and was the only person who had never spoken a word of contempt to him. Today, as she passed by, she just gave a slight nod as a greeting. No confirmation was needed. No thanks were necessary. But between the two of them, a fragile trust had just formed. That night, during his late shift, Oliver was mopping the floor near the shipping area when he heard slow footsteps approaching. It was Leo, a long-time warehouse worker with tanned skin, calloused hands, and eyes that were fearless but tired. He stopped, not looking at him directly, and said softly, "You're new, right?" Oliver nodded. Leo continued, "Keep your head down. Don't ask anything. Don't touch the numbers. And don't touch the crates with no labels." That was it. Then he walked away. During the short mid-shift break, Leo sat far away, unnoticed. But before he left, he silently placed a mislabeled, peeled-off barcode sticker on the table. Not a word, not a sound. But Oliver understood. Back at his rented room, He scanned the code with a small handheld device. A hidden folder in the internal system appeared named ALT Load 12. Inside it were a list of shipments with no one to sign for them, mismatched weights, a series of scanned invoices with no names. Someone had tried to speak out before and had been silenced. The next morning, Oliver arrived earlier than usual, walked through the operations corridor, and met Leo at a doorway. They said nothing, but this time Leo looked at him for a second longer. In that very second, Oliver knew. Not everyone was indifferent. It's just that they had tried, and were taught that silence was the only thing that could keep them in this system. And now, he was no longer alone. There were at least two people here, Sarah and Leo, who still held on to what so many others had lost a conscience. People like them didn't stand out, didn't scream, didn't argue back. But in a world where silence was demanded, wordless kindness was the strongest act of resistance. From the moment he saw the hidden folder named ALT Load 12, Oliver knew he had crossed a threshold. All suspicion now had a concrete form. It was no longer a feeling, no longer intuition. It was data, documents, a repeating chain of behavior. He began to execute his plan like an engineer building a giant trap with the very materials his enemy had left behind. First, the equipment. A microphone clipped to his lapel, disguised under a silver-grey thread. A micro camera, mounted in a chest button capable of recording a direct angle when he lowered his head, and a high-frequency audio recorder placed in his broom caddy, turned on at the start of each shift. Nothing complex, nothing expensive, but to Oliver, every word, every frustrated breath from Brenda was an asset. The next day, he made a point to clean the office area earlier than usual. Just then, Brenda slammed down the phone, her voice as sharp as a paper cut. "Don't let tonight's shipment be late again. Victor has already asked about it." Oliver was just walking by when she turned around. "What is it, old man?" "Sorry, I misheard which area to clean." Brenda frowned, but said nothing more, just a passing remark to an outsider. But to Oliver's microphone, it was the first piece of evidence recording a directive from Victor, the man who had yet to make an appearance. That night, Oliver installed two more devices. A small voice recorder the size of his little finger, hidden behind the mat under Brenda's desk. A magnet-mounted camera, placed inside an air vent overlooking the inventory room. They didn't need to record everything just the right moments, because he understood in the world of manipulators, casual remarks are the one thing they never expect to be saved. The next day, the first incident occurred. A crate was mislabeled, or rather, deliberately so. Brenda slammed the inventory clipboard on the table. "Who sent this crate to Area F? None of the codes match." Mark turned and looked at Oliver. "Was it you?" Oliver feigned confusion. "I thought it was going to Area C." Instantly, Mark walked over, leaned in close to his ear, his voice loud enough for the microphone to pick up. "Next time, don't touch anything that Brenda hasn't approved. Got it? One sentence, one warning, one unspoken order. And in that sentence, the dark process that no one dared to write down was exposed. Oliver apologized, bowed his head, and retreated. But inside, he was smiling. Because there is no confession clearer than a correction that is perfectly timed. After his shift, he returned to his rented room, backed up the data, named the clips, M01 BR01, voice, Brenda Victor, order confirmed. M02 Mark, off-record instruction. Along with it were a screen scan of the mislabeled crate's code, the dispatch time which did not match the original system. The small pieces were gradually forming a network. Their every oversight was inadvertently mapping out the entire shadow system, and Oliver knew they thought he was a slow, witless janitor. But he didn't need to be fast. He just needed to be patient enough to listen to them bury themselves with their own words. In the middle of the afternoon shift, as the sounds of forklifts and packing machines hummed as usual, a sudden announcement came over the internal speaker. "Eli Carter, please report to operations room number 2. No one looked up. No one asked why. But Oliver understood. This wasn't a reminder. It was a signal, an official warning from the system. He gently brushed his sleeve, pressing the record button in his collar this time, with a light swipe on his outer lapel. He walked slowly toward the frosted glass door at the end of the hall. The room was small, cold, no natural light. Mark was already waiting, his arms crossed over his chest, his back leaning against the chair as if he owned the space. No coffee, no greeting, just a dry voice. "Sit." Oliver sat, his posture slightly withdrawn, his eyes avoiding contact, exactly the manner of a subordinate in fear. Mark began, slowly, as if reading from a memo. "Some people are saying, you're not working very smoothly." He paused, then continued. "You ask questions about things that aren't your business. You slow down the workflow. You look at the logbooks more closely than necessary." Oliver didn't respond. The same tired eyes, shoulders slightly slumped. It was exactly what they wanted to see, an easily controlled person. Mark sighed, stood up, and walked a circle around the table. He stopped behind Oliver, his voice right next to his ear, clear enough for the microphone to capture every syllable. "We're flexible here, Eli, but only when employees don't cause trouble." Oliver turned his head slightly, not looking directly, his voice small. I'm just trying to do a good job." Mark returned to the table, sat down, and gave a faint, cold smile. "Good, because around here, people who ask too many questions usually don't stay long." Another silence. Then Mark pushed a blank sheet of paper toward him. "It's not a formal write-up, just a note for our records, internal only. But if you sign it, it'll help us manage things better." Oliver took the paper, pretending to read. The content was vague, with no specific errors listed, only phrases like "needs to improve speed, has not adapted to the work culture, has been verbally reminded, a soft blow, no accusations, no termination, just a subtle mark on his record, the beginning of a process of psychological erosion. Oliver signed his name, no resistance. Inside, he knew, without the recording, this action would become the truth and they could pin anything on me. But now, every word from Mark had been saved. After leaving the room, Oliver passed through the hallway behind the warehouse. Sarah happened to be walking by. Without stopping, she said softly, her eyes not looking at him directly, "Did you notice? Tonight's shipment arrived earlier than usual." He nodded slightly. Sarah continued, her voice even quieter. "Every time. There's no paperwork, and only one person dares to sign for it." She glanced toward Brenda's office, then walked away. Oliver watched her go. He said nothing, but in his mind, a conclusion had just formed. They're not just testing me. They're testing everyone who knows the truth. And if someone breaks, they'll use them as an example. He returned to his shift as normal. But that night, before turning off the light, he wrote in his electronic journal, "Mark has issued a warning. Sarah is being watched. They're starting to worry. I cannot slip up, because with just one mistake, they will throw me out like a bag of trash." And he finished with a final line, "But now, I'm no longer investigating alone. I'm dismantling a system, one nail at a time." When you live in a system where everyone bows their head, even a slight nod is an act of rebellion. Sarah knew that, and so did Oliver. That night, the late shift arrived later than usual. An unmarked truck stopped in front of the warehouse at 10:12 p.m., 40 minutes ahead of the operational schedule. Brenda was there. No clipboard, no one with her. Just a sharp gaze and a clear statement echoing from behind the cargo container. "Just push it in. No need to scan. I'll sign for it." Oliver stepped back into the shadows, his hand tightening on the broom handle as if stretching his shoulders. But in reality, he had just turned on the video recorder mounted in the brim of his baseball cap. One more step, one more piece of the puzzle. On his way back to the restroom, which was usually empty, Oliver unexpectedly found Sarah standing there, waiting. She didn't turn, didn't call his name. Just a sideways glance, then a whisper that made the air feel several degrees colder. "Have you ever heard the name Miguel?" Oliver didn't answer. He just shook his head slightly. Sarah leaned lightly against the wall, holding a folder, her eyes fixed on the dimly lit row of containers. "Miguel used to work the night shift here, like you. He was the first person I ever saw dare to ask, why do shipments have no codes? Why are the numbers in the books completely different from the actual inventory?" She paused, breathing slowly. He filed an internal report. It had pictures, invoices, emails. I saw it. Everything was sent to headquarters. A week later, Miguel disappeared. Oliver frowned slightly. For the first time. Sarah continued, her voice so low that only someone truly listening would notice. No resignation, no announcement, no farewell email. Just one line in the system transferred to the Tulsa branch. Oliver whispered, "And you? You didn't speak up." Sarah looked at him for the first time that evening. Her eyes were sad but sharp. At the time, I thought silence was the only option for survival. A beat of silence. But now I'm not so sure if I'm really living or just existing. Oliver didn't reply with words. He just placed his hand on the wooden door frame and tapped it 3 times, a meaningless action to an outsider. But it was his way of marking a signal on the audio recording for later extraction. Returning to the storage area, he wrote in his electronic journal, "Name Miguel, witness who disappeared, filed a report response unknown. Incident occurred 6 months ago. Sarah is likely holding a copy, needs verification." Then he typed a final line. "This is no longer a system that overlooks errors. This is a system that punishes the truth." Later that night, Brenda walked past Oliver in the pallet inspection area. She didn't smile, wasn't angry. She just looked straight at him and said, out of nowhere, "Around here, you don't have to be too smart to keep a job. You just have to know when to be quiet." Oliver nodded. No reaction. Just the slow, steady beat of his heart. Because in that moment, he knew Sarah was being watched, and he had crossed the line of safety. But in that very same moment, they were no longer fighting alone. Sometimes, to find the true nature of a system, you don't need to break it, you just need to take one step out of line. Oliver understood that, and that night he decided to create an error, not so big as to get fired, not so small as to be ignored, but just enough to force the person in charge to fix it. And in the process of fixing it, they would reveal how they truly operated. That shift. A shipment arrived late as usual. No label, no signature. Oliver went to the pallet storage, feigning confusion, looked at the log, and moved the crate to Area C instead of Area F, as the unspoken rule dictated whenever Brenda gave her silent approval. No one noticed. Or not yet. 12 minutes later, Mark stormed into the inventory area like a programmed burst of anger. "What the hell did you just do?" Oliver looked up, his eyes cloudy, his voice timid. "I saw this crate had no code, so I moved it to Area C like the diagram showed." Mark didn't let him finish. He snatched the clipboard from Oliver's hand, wielding it like an invisible whip. "Who told you to touch unprocessed goods? Who taught you to move crates on your own?" Oliver lowered his eyes, his hand clenching slightly, but his voice remained soft. "I thought it was part of my job." Mark glanced around. No one else was there but the two of them. And then, in that unguarded moment, he blurted out what the entire system had hidden for so long. "Next time, you wait for Brenda's nod. If it's no paperwork cargo, you leave it alone, no scanning, no touching, no talking. Understand?" A beat of silence. Then Mark finished with a threatening tone. "The slower you are to understand, the easier it is to lose your job." Oliver nodded slightly. No argument, no reaction. Just a useless janitor who had just been scolded. But inside, The microphone in his collar had just recorded the most valuable statement of the investigation so far. That night, in his rented room, Oliver replayed the recording. Every word, every one of Mark's hurried breaths was crystal clear. Wait for Brenda's nod. If it's no paperwork cargo, you leave it alone. No scanning. A procedure that didn't appear in any internal handbook. An oral procedure, passed from one person to another like unwritten spells. He noted it in his private encrypted system, verbal confirmation from Mark regarding no paperwork cargo procedure, accompanied by a threatening reaction loss of job for non-compliance. This was no longer a guess. This was a confession in a real voice, in a real situation. The next morning, Oliver noticed something had changed. Brenda no longer looked at him like he was a useless fool. Her eyes had narrowed, scrutinizing. Mark walked past, not scolding as usual, just giving a curt nod as if considering something. And Oliver knew the small trap had worked. Just one wrong step was enough to make the mastermind reveal themselves to restore order. And every time they fixed things, they incriminated themselves. That night, before turning off the lights, Oliver wrote one last line. For the first time, I am controlling their heart rate, with the very slowness they despise. 2 days after Oliver's mistake, the Fremont warehouse became unusual. Not because of any major event, but because everything was unnaturally quiet. Mark was seen less often. Brenda wasn't raising her voice as usual. Only one thing became clearer than ever: someone was being targeted. That evening, while Oliver was mopping Area A, Brenda's voice echoed from the hallway. "Leo, my office, now." The air froze. Everyone else in the warehouse stopped what they were doing for a few seconds. Then they all looked down as if they had just witnessed a car accident. Oliver stopped his mop, his eyes following the door that closed behind Leo. 10 minutes. 10 minutes felt like 30. When Leo returned, his face was pale, his steps uneven. Oliver moved closer, without asking. Leo muttered softly, as if talking to himself. "They said I took a crate of electronics, but I've never even been in that section." Oliver didn't respond, but inside him, a quiet anger began to boil. Right after his shift, he returned to his rented room and turned on a secondary phone connected to a separate video feed. It was a video from the night before, a silent backup he had set up through the internal network. In the clip, 8:48 p.m., the crate was still intact in the locked storeroom. 9:10 p.m., Leo was in Area B, 2 warehouse aisles away. 9:56 p.m. Brenda entered storeroom A to inspect, alone. There was no footage of Leo near the crate, no scene of Leo in contact with the accused area, only solid proof of a blatant setup. Oliver cut the video clip, highlighted the time frame, pressed send. No name, no note. Just an anonymous file, sent to the company's internal reporting hotline, a line originally created to protect employees, but which had long become meaningless. But this time, It worked. The next morning, Leo came to work, his face still worried. But when Brenda walked by, she didn't look directly at him as she usually did. Just a fleeting glance and something fearful. Oliver stood in the distance, cleaning the glass window near the office. Mark walked past, glancing at Oliver for a second, and in that moment, he knew they sensed someone was watching them, and that very fact unsettled them. Leo quietly came to sit next to Oliver during a short break. No eye contact, no questions, just a whisper. "I don't know who cleared my name, but if you know who it was, tell them. Thank you." Oliver just nodded. No smile, no words. Because in a world where kindness was considered dangerous, a nod was a silent oath. That night, in his encrypted journal, Oliver wrote, "Leo was targeted to make an example of others, but the system went off track this time. The trapper stepped into his own trap, and for the first time since setting foot in the Fremont warehouse, he was no longer the only one who knew how to make the darkness reveal its light." 2 days after the Leo incident, another notice came to Oliver, this time in writing, a thin sheet of paper, no formal letterhead, just a cold line of text. "Eli Carter, temporarily transferred to receiving Dock 4. Reason suitable expertise. Reduce shift conflicts." Brenda handed it to him personally, with a smile that did not hide its implication. "Good luck with the new area. They're not as easygoing as I am." Mark said nothing. He just leaned against the wall behind, arms crossed, his eyes watching silently as if witnessing a purge. Oliver bowed his head, nodded slightly, and replied softly, "I will try to do better." But inside, he understood perfectly. This wasn't a transfer. This was isolation. Area 4. A place even long-time employees didn't want to set foot in. Few people, little light, and most importantly, no cameras. The shipments here arrived ahead of schedule. Labels didn't match the system. Receiving logs had signatures, but no deliverer's name. An employee named Curtis met him at the warehouse door. "You the new guy? Don't ask questions. Just do your part." In less than 2 hours, Oliver noticed the anomalies. The inventory log was always pre-filled. Dates in the system were backdated. There were crates labeled cleaning supplies, but inside were phones and chargers. That evening, when almost everyone had gone home, Oliver stayed behind alone, pretending to rearrange chemicals. In reality, he was printing out a comparison of shipping and receiving times and actual item codes from an auxiliary scanner he had secretly connected under a desk. Each printout was a confirmation. A parallel system was in operation, a system designed to evade any audit. And then, the moment he had waited 3 long weeks for finally arrived, when Oliver accidentally dropped his employee ID right in front of the storage room, a seemingly clumsy act. But 7 minutes later, when he returned to look for it, the recording from the device he had placed earlier showed a man in a grey shirt walked in, no name tag, no access permit. He didn't look for the ID. He opened the lid of crate number 213, did a quick check, and then walked away. That profile, Oliver had seen it before. That face was Victor Hale. Victor, the ghost controlling everything, had finally appeared. No bodyguards, no clipboard, no sign of a regional director, just a man walking in as if he had worked there his whole life. But the problem was he shouldn't have been there. That night, Oliver saved the clip under the name VH Physical Presence 213, with the description Victor Hale present in an unscheduled area. Direct access to an uninspected shipment. Then he backed up the file to 3 separate sources, each one encrypted with a different password. A hard copy was sent to his trusted lawyer, the only person besides him who knew that Eli Carter was actually Oliver Grant. The next morning, Brenda dropped by Area 4 unexpectedly. She asked a few casual questions, her eyes scanning the warehouse as if assessing the damage. Oliver just smiled and bowed as usual. She turned away, but her gaze had changed, no longer contemptuous, but wary. At that moment, he knew they thought they had pushed him away, but in reality, they had opened the door to the treasure trove. And it was here, in the silent, cameraless Area 4, that he would dismantle the entire network they had built on fear and lies. The notice came at the end of the afternoon shift, cold and brief. Eli Carter, meeting room 3, immediately. Oliver wiped his hands on an old cloth and walked slowly toward the end of the hall. The grey steel door was ajar. No one called out. No one was waiting to lead the way. He walked in on his own, like a sheep entering the wolf's den. But this time, the wolf had been watched for weeks. Inside, the light was dim. Victor sat in the middle, a suit jacket over his shoulders, his eyes as sharp as a scalpel. Brenda stood leaning against the wall, arms crossed, lips pressed tightly together. Mark had his feet up on the opposite chair, as if waiting for a show. On the table was a thin file and a termination form, already filled out, only leaving. The signature line blank. Victor spoke first, his voice low and clear with each beat. "We need to talk about your work performance, Eli. It seems you're having trouble following procedures. Too many mistakes. Incorrect data entry. Goods processed in the wrong areas." Oliver said nothing. He just sat still, his eyes downcast, his shoulders slightly slumped as if he were trembling. Brenda interjected, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "We've been patient, but there's a limit. The system can't function if someone keeps straying." Mark nodded, adding another stab. "Or if someone oversteps their role, like you." Victor pushed the form toward Oliver, his voice lower but ice-cold. "Sign this, and we won't make a big deal out of it. No internal reprimand, no stain on your record. It's just, you're not a good fit." Oliver picked up the form, his hand trembling slightly. His head was bowed, his lips pursed as if swallowing tears. The silence stretched, as taut as a string about to snap. Brenda added more pressure. "Don't think you're special. Before you, there were a few others who thought they were smart. Where are they now? Who knows?" Mark's lips curled into a sneer. Like Miguel, like Leo. Once someone starts asking too many questions. Victor leaned back, finishing with a voice full of authority. This is your only chance to leave quietly. If you refuse, then trust me, silence will no longer be an option for you. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Oliver lifted his head. His eyes were brighter than ever before. He placed the form down on the table, adjusted his sleeve, and in that very moment, a small click sound came from the watch he was wearing. The lights in the room dimmed for a beat. Then suddenly, a screen behind Victor turned on. Brenda turned around. Mark shot to his feet. Victor turned his head, his face slowly turning pale. On the screen, a picture of Oliver, but not Eli. It was Oliver Grant, CEO, founder, owner of the entire Redwood freight transportation system. His voice came from a pre-recorded video, clear and commanding. If you're watching this, you've crossed the line, and everything has been recorded. Victor stood up, about to turn off the screen, but Mark had already backed away, his eyes filled with panic. Brenda could barely breathe. Next came a series of videos, Mark ordering to wait for Brenda's approval for no paperwork cargo. Brenda talking on the phone, mentioning Victor's name. The scene of Victor sneaking into Area 4. The scene of Leo being summoned and falsely accused. Every piece of evidence clear, undeniable. Every word they thought was buried in darkness, now echoed in the middle of the meeting room. Finally, Oliver's voice in the video concluded with a single sentence. Silence is a choice, but sometimes it is the most powerful indictment. In the meeting room, no one said a thing. No more threats, no more contemptuous smiles. Only a cold, hard truth standing between them, and their downfall. Oliver sat still. No need to raise his voice, no need to make a declaration. He had won with the very thing they never expected: patience, and a memory that does not forget. A knock on the door echoed in the stunned silence. The meeting room door opened. 3 people walked in, 2 security officers in black uniforms, and a man wearing an internal investigator's badge. Brief, silent, no sirens, no shouting. Victor Hale, you are under investigation for allegations of abuse of power, concealment of illegal transactions, and manipulation of the system's operations. Brenda Clark, Mark Hanley, your names are on the list for an urgent summons. Victor took a step back, speechless. Brenda's hands trembled, her eyes filled with bewilderment. Mark stood frozen, as if unmasked in a crowd. Oliver, no longer Eli, remained seated. No smile, no triumph. Just silently watching the 3 people who once reigned, being led away by the very evidence they had created themselves. A week later, the entire Redwood Freight Company was summoned to the main hall. For the first time in years, founder Oliver Grant appeared before all his employees. No fancy suit, no distant podium, just a calm man, standing among those who had once looked down on him and those who had chosen to stand for what was right. His voice was low and clear. I used to believe that to run a company, all you needed was strategy and finance. But Fremont taught me, an organization is not destroyed by outside competitors, but by compromise from within. He paused, looking down at the front row where Sarah and Leo were sitting quietly. There are people here who, though not paid for their courage, still chose to do the right thing when no one was watching, not for personal gain, not for glory, but because they could not turn a blind eye to injustice. The entire hall fell silent. Oliver stepped down, walking straight to the two of them. No award, no big fanfare. He just handed each a white envelope. Inside was an appointment letter, Sarah Lewis, Head Supervisor, Fremont Warehouse. Leo Barnes, Team Lead, West Region Inventory. Not a single clap until the entire row of employees stood up, silent, but full of weight. For the first time, the silence was no longer fear. It was recognition. From that day on, Fremont changed. No massive overhaul, no grand slogans, just small actions. A young employee picked up a dropped folder without being told. A new person was greeted, not ignored. The break room became filled with warm conversation. Meetings began to have real debates, instead of robotic nods. Sarah held the door open for a late-shift worker. Leo bent down to show a clumsy intern how to check inventory. No one ordered them to do it. They chose to, because now the culture no longer came from the top down, but from within, from the very people who had almost been buried on the top floor. Oliver stood before the glass window, no longer holding a mop, no longer with a timid gaze, just the calm of a man who had seen the darkest side of his own company and had not turned away. He looked down at the loading dock where a new kid was being instructed. The afternoon light shone through, illuminating the safety vest like a reminder justice doesn't need to scream. It just needs not to be forgotten. Oliver smiled, not because of the victory, but because, finally, the silent ones had been seen, believed in, and handed back the torch. It's not always the loudest person who speaks the truth. Sometimes, the quietest one is the one who holds the soul of a system. Oliver didn't expose them with power, but with patience. He didn't shatter the mask, but let them take it off themselves. And when the truth speaks, no one needs to shout. Thank you for staying until the end of the story. If this touched you, please share it, because somewhere, someone else might be fighting silently and just needs a look of trust. See you again in another story, where kindness is never a weakness, and justice always finds a way to appear.